Thanks for tuning into this edition of the Urban Debate. I'm Avni Raja. Our focus today is going to be on the GST, the Goods and Services Tax. 4 years since the GST was implemented, where do we stand today? Now, this was exactly 4 years ago that the GST was implemented. It was the most anticipated tax reform that was first proposed in 2000 and finally implemented in 2017. It was 17 years in the making. The various indirect taxes were all merged together into the GST. It was started to be a game-changing tax reform. It was meant to do a whole host of things, including add to the country's GDP, simplify tax structures, make it easier for businesses, make goods and services cheaper. The good and simple tax is what it was called, and that was really the aim. But like any new reform, this too had a lot of teething issues. But the question is, 4 years later, where do we really stand? The GST regime does have some positive aspects to it, such as increased compliance, digitization has become a lot more, rates rationalization, but there are some negatives as well. And one of those major negatives, as I see it at this point, is that small businesses, the small service providers are still finding it extremely difficult to comply with the GST. It's becoming very difficult for them, and hence they find ways to not comply and to evade the GST. States' compensation cess is the other big issue that we'll also talk about and touch upon. There are items that are still outside the ambit of GST. There are still various structures and cesses. So the fact of one nation, one tax is still not where we are at least as yet. Hopefully it will happen in the future. So 4 years on, where do we stand on the GST regime? Is it truly a good and simple tax? And has it really achieved what it set out to? That's what we're going to talk about. Let me welcome my guests who are joining us tonight. We've got Dr. Sameer Kagalkar, spokesperson of the BJP, A. Sarvanan, spokesperson of the DMK, Dr. Anshul Avijit of the Congress, and Tamal Bandyopadhyay, author and consulting editor of the Business Standard, Professor Aman Agarwal, economist, and B.C. Bhartiya, National President, Confederation of All India Traders. Thank you all of you so much for joining us. Tamal, I actually want to start with you here, to sort of help set the context, because let's face it, the GST has had a lot of teething issues. Like I was pointing out, there are some positives, there are negatives. Revenue did not increase as was expected. But to also be fair, there was an economic slowdown, and then that led, that ran into the pandemic, and that was obviously unprecedented. Somewhere, do you think that the GST hasn't really had the opportunity to do what it set out to do? Tamal, if my voice is reaching you?
Yeah. Okay, you're asking me. I lost your first one. Yeah, okay. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, fine. No, I heard you. I think you summarized brilliantly in the beginning. So it's, you would like to, it's a two cliches. One is this, of course, this is, I think, biggest tax reform, which was to be, which should have been there. And I think we should, with open arms, all of us should have welcomed, and we did welcome it. But the second part, as you rightly mentioned, is it's a little slipshod implementation, at least in the beginning. So still, it's a work in progress. So why I'm saying that it's a huge tax reform? Because, before GST, anybody was doing business in states, they needed to have some kind of 495 different papers in the indirect tax regime, which have been reduced to 12 papers. So that shows the simplification. And everything, if you look at that, these are all positive theoretically. But what happened is this: if you look at this, one issue which is a very structural issue that's becoming a problem, because what happened is this: because states cannot levy direct taxes and customs duty, etc., states were promised guaranteed revenue growth of 14% for first 5 years. We have not been able to do that. That there's a problem. There is no revenue growth, and on the one hand, you need to ensure that. On the other hand, the GST rates are coming down. In fact, Arvind Subramanian committee was in favor of weighted average of 15.3%. And I think by 2019 itself, it came down to some 11.6% odd. And if I remember correctly, the 15th Finance Commission, on behalf of that, IMF did some study, and the effective rate actually is 11.8%. So the kind of, indeed, Finance Minister we have heard recently, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, she did talk about how the tax base doubled from 66.25 lakh to 1.28 crore. She also spoke about continuous 8 months, 1 trillion rupees plus. And in April, it was 1.41 lakh crore. That's the GST. That's the GST accretion. But if you look at this in the tax to, I mean, the percentage of GDP, actually there's a 1% fall. And right from the beginning, from 2018-19, if I remember correctly, the budgeted estimate was 7.43 trillion, but actual realization was 78 trillion. And that's the case of 2020, 2021. Of course, the pandemic has added to our woes. So yes, there are positives like digitalization. There are positives like e-invoicing. But the cooperative federalism that we have been talking about, that's not happening. There are many points of conflicts, and it's a long way to go. And particularly two things before I end, and I can discuss it later, the other issues. 1 year down the line, after 5 years, there are two very critical points are coming. One is this 14% assured tax revenue growth, which has been committed, that would end in after 5 years. So should we continue with this? I'm not very sure. I don't think we should, this kind of thing. That's one part of it. Second part of it also, after the 5 years, you need to do kind of auditing of companies. And there are a lot of gray areas. For instance, the different companies have, what is the kind of nature kind of thing. There are certain pockets there which are still gray areas. It's not yet clear. And of course, finally, should we bring in petroleum, real estate, electricity, and alcohol under the GST net? That's also a matter of debate. Everybody talks about petroleum should be, but states, will you ask Amit Mitra, West Bengal finance minister, he would put his foot down. He said, look, this is the only way states can generate revenue. In fact, 30% of states' revenue comes from cess on petrol and petroleum products. So they would not like to give up. So the cooperative federalism that we envisage is at threat. There are many areas of conflict. We need to iron them out. But having said that, as I said, as a move, as a policy decision, I think all of us should welcome it. It's the best that could have happened. I think these are the glitches, and it's taking a bit longer than we would have anticipated. And COVID also created much of a problem. Had there been generation been higher than what has been, I think some of the problems would not have been there. So again, I end with the cliche what I started with. It's a work in progress, but definitely positive for the economy.
Yes, absolutely, Tamal. Some extremely important points that you've raised there, and that we will talk about, especially with regard to the state's compensation issue, bringing fuel and petroleum under the GST ambit are extremely crucial issues there. But Professor Aman Agarwal, coming to you now, in terms of, your perspective on where we stand as far as the GST is concerned, because even Tamal was pointing out, there is good and there is bad. But the question here is, right now, as we stand today, given the fact that, yes, we were in a slowdown, given the fact that it is an unprecedented pandemic, does the bad outweigh the good right now?
You see, the GST as a baby is growing up well. It's still in a very nascent stage. It has only gone for 4 years. Tax systems in various regimes around the world have taken decades, at times even 3 or 4 decades, at times half a century, to actually stabilize and mature to a great level. And in various countries, they keep changing every 2 or 3 decades as well. But the GST has been doing fairly well, given the fact that we have been having an average over 1 lakh crore collection, which has been going on despite the COVID being there and impacting. And we saw the figures which we were showing in terms of the projected and the budgeted and the revised estimates which were there, which were a little less, but still they were doing fairly well. This clearly shows the kind of confidence the industry and the others are inducing in the system. It is still evolving, as I said, and two major components, as one of them pointed out earlier, is petroleum and petroleum products, and the other being alcohol, have been kept out of the GST net, which actually will rebound this GST framework to double the numbers which we are seeing currently as well, even if it is introduced today, including if there are surcharges to the tune of the highest bracket GST level, and there are surcharges of the highest level bracket, that means 28% GST with 28% surcharge. Even then, we will see a double rebound of the GST collection, which can be there and which can ultimately will have to be done by states, whether A party run or B party run, which is important. The other component which is there is that I remember when I used to meet a large number of industrialists at the OECD meeting in Paris, as well as the World Bank meeting, annual meetings in DC, and some of them at the ADB meetings, annual meetings. Many industrialists used to have this problem that they were able to bring in business, but when they started businesses, in some states, they were able to kickstart the business within a span of a year, 2 year, 3 year, depending on the kind of business they brought in, the industry they were setting up. But in many times, they would say, we have been successful in 2 states, but we failed in another 3 or 4 states. So this was a mixed bag of reaction which most industrialists had from across the globe when they came to India, because they said the tax structures were different, the framework was different, it was very difficult to match with things. Now, given the fact that the GST come in with, and the fact that they have learned to live with GST regimes in their own countries, in large part of Europe, in US, in Australia, in Japan, other parts as well, where they have been able to comfortably understand this concept, for them it is a big boomer. And that is why we are also seeing the fact that the foreign direct investment going up steadily, and we have had a record-breaking, foreign the correction which was there to the tune of about 600 billion getting crossed in the foreign exchange reserves, and another about $31 billion just come this year in portfolio, and roughly about 81.7 billion which came in foreign direct investment. So, this is also an impact which we can see that how the industry globally is reacting to some of the tax frameworks which we are seeing in the India. They are teething troubles. Many of them are still going on, and I hope the government will make efforts to smoothen them out as we go through this journey of GST.
Yes, absolutely, Professor Agarwal. All right, let me now go across to Dr. Anshul Avijit here. Dr. Anshul, I know the Congress has been vociferously, against how the GST is actually structured. In fact, recently Rahul Gandhi said GST needs to be reconceptualized entirely. If you can take us through what it is that you want to change in the GST structure right now.
No, Avni, let me just begin by saying that, the birth of the GST itself was under extremely stressful circumstances. We must not forget there was a precipitous decline in our GDP from 2016 onwards, and right till when 2017, already demonetization has happened. So at that time, there was an extremely stressful economic situation in the country. It got off to a terrible start. It widened the gap between small businesses and big businesses, so they weren't able to cope with the kind of automated indirect taxation ecosystem that you were trying to create. All great, very hopeful ideas. I'm all for that. But they weren't able to create it because the timing was all correct, because you had a disastrous political move like demonetization. So we cannot, the real economy cannot be divorced from every time we discuss GST. Even what is happening right now during the pandemic, the kind of recessionary tendencies that are going on, in fact, some people are calling it stagnation, has to be discussed along with the GST. Of course, the potential of the GST, its ambitions were very, very high. That you remove the cascading effects of taxation, this kind of automated system that comes in, emails, invoices, you link up imports, you increase in exports, all very well. But the main bone of contention has been, and this has been exacerbated by the vaccine policy itself, has been the difference between the states and the center. They just haven't got this kind of fiscal federalism right. And that has been the arrogance of the central government in dealing with the states. We saw it last time with when Nirmala Sitharamanji, the finance sahiba, actually had a GST meeting before they reduced the taxes on certain goods which were affecting the pandemic. Just before that, she was highly dismissive of the GST councils. So unless there is first of all, a restructuring of the GST council according to the rules that were instituted, there is a chairman, there's a vice chairman of the GST council. If all office bearers are made, there is a secretariat. If various institutional changes take place in the GST, and first of all, correct your this kind of relationship that you have with the center and the states. It's already deeply suspicious. And this has happened in the background, and that's why political economy comes in here, because this has happened in the background of the pandemic. You know, you've had it ever since the migrant crisis took place, was deep suspicion between the center and the state, how they were handling. The railway ministry came in, and then you had it in the differential pricing of the vaccinations. And compounded with that, you have deep suspicion that the GST compensations that are due to the states are not coming in. Yes, of course, many of the states have this kind of loan agreement where, you know, shortfalls in GST compensation are done with. But, you know, the states are longing for funds at the moment. You have differences of opinion all over. If Ms. Manpreet Badalji, the Chief Minister of Punjab, gave a talk on GST before the last GST meeting, and he said there is a kind of GST terrorism that is going on. There is a tyranny of the GST regime controlled by the center. That has to go. Mr. Amit Mitra, if you speak to, he doesn't want anything in the GST. In fact, he says that the states lost 70% of their taxes because of joining the GST. Of course, he doesn't want the petrol fuel prices in the GST, but the Congress is unequivocal in its demand that the petrol prices actually come under the GST, because this arbitrariness, this heartlessness that we are seeing of constant and ceaseless rise in petrol prices to a staggering extent, to which the center has collected 24,000 lakh crores over the past 7 years. Nobody knows where it's going, right? So we want a restructuring. We want a complete and thorough look at the GST mechanism, the way it works, but in consultation. You know, many of the things are done arbitrarily. The GST Council meetings are not taken seriously. The discussions are not made. So they have to be done in consultation.
Yes, fair enough, Dr. Anshul Avijit. I understand some of the points that you're making, but, you know, and we'll, of course, fuel, of course, is one major issue that will bring up and want to talk about as well. But we have to appreciate this pandemic has been unprecedented. Nobody could have ever imagined something like this would hit. So some leeway has to be given for that. But let me, in fact, go across to Dr. Sameer for his response to what we've just heard so far.
And one thing one needs to realize, it's not just about the tax rates and the numbers that we are talking. GST is a massively transformational exercise, and in a way, you are trying to do a structural reform. You need to try and understand that the structural reform is quite different from the way it's panning out. The ups and downs is a normal part of an economy, notwithstanding the pandemic, right? Pandemic has made things really, really worse. But that said, there will be ups, there will be downs. What the GST is trying to create is build up a strong, robust infrastructure, a tax infrastructure that's going to be built for scale, built for future, enabling the country to sort of really zoom up, utilizing its complete potential. No, you're trying to, for example, just sort of try to showcase the synergy that's been brought in. You're trying to sort of double your tax base. The increase in the compliance has been made that much easier and rendered seamless for the reason that's technology being used. You're ensuring that technology and big data based analysis is being used to ensure that the people who are not compliant have been pointedly being called out. And at the same time, you're making life easy for the transporters all across the country by bringing in the e-invoicing. I'm just pointing out a few figures here, and notwithstanding the fact that one of the earlier panelists made out that consistently since October 2020, we've been crossing the 1 lakh crore mark, you know, notwithstanding the heavy hit that the country has taken. So the point that we are trying to make is this is a transformational exercise, a structural reform as big in impact as the 1991 was. And this was not overnight as it's tried to portray by friends in the Congress ecosystem, right? It's been well thought out, it's been discussed, it's been debated. But if you want to wait till a wave stops, then get into
Dr. Sameer, if I can just interrupt you for a quick moment and then I will allow you to continue. I just want to make a very quick point. I understand that we're talking about how it is a structural change and it takes time. And of course, there are a lot of positives. But the fact here is if we can just focus on some of the issues that are there right now, because one nation, one tax is what was proposed. That is not the case. You have multiple structures today. You have multiple cesses. There's some items which are outside the ambit of the GST at this point in time. And on top of all of that, there are a lot of small businesses, a lot of small service providers. I mean, I'm sure all of us at some point in time have faced it where, you know, we're being told that if you want a bill, you will have to pay extra. Otherwise, or on the other hand, people saying that if you want a bill, don't even call me. These are small contractors. So people are still finding it extremely difficult. And this is a big issue at this point in time.
First, let me answer your first point first. One of the earlier panelists rightly pointed out, this is an absolutely positive thing in the positive direction with being a work in progress, right? That's an absolute right depiction of what it is. It is a work in progress to a very large extent in the right direction. You are bound to get some amount of teething issues. And to be fair enough, the country as a whole deserves a credit for throwing up such a massively good federal structure. There can be issues, there will be disagreements, there will be difference of opinion, but that in no way makes this a non-federal nature characteristic in nature. Come to think of it, a country of this size, country of this magnitude, with so many political parties and local pressures and pulls, both socio-economic and political, they've been able to sort of come to a very broad consensus and agreement on bringing all these things together. And as we're talking about now, the finance minister has repeatedly reiterated her stance that the government of India is more than welcome to have this discussed and bring the petroleum under the gambit of GST. That's a point that needs to be taken in consultation with all the states, and the government of India is more than happy doing it. That's a commitment. That's number one. Number two, coming to the point that you made with respect to the small businesses, right? Absolutely a valid point wherein a lot of these kinds of teething issues were borne by the smaller businesses for two reasons. Number one, their own lack of understanding or their sense of comfort with the kind of technology and the technological process, number one. Number two, combine that with the initial glitches that the system itself went through, be it in terms of rates being in different structures. I mean, as a counterpoint to it, you might probably feel that the GST Council has been extremely open to inputs, feedback, and criticism, so much so that the kind of rates revision that's happened has been extremely praiseworthy. So coming back to the small businesses, they did face some amount of issues, no two words about it. I have my own circle of friends wherein I work with them together on their aspect. They have to learn to come onto the digital platform, the way you get to see a Golgappa guy coming onto the Google Pay kind of a platform.
All right. Dr. Sameer, as far as the GST Council is concerned, it's a completely different conversation altogether, and we will touch upon it if time permits, because the GST Council has now become sort of a battleground for, you know, a political battleground of sorts, which is not what it was set out to be. But that aside, let's talk a little bit more about this issue of what small businesses are facing, and I want to go across to BC Bhartiya here. BC Bhartiya, you know, the CIT has been extremely vocal in terms of the issues being faced here because of GST. If you can help us understand what are the kind of issues, adapting to digitization that the small traders, small businesses are facing at the moment.
Thank you, Avni ji. I would like to make it very clear. When our panelists and everyone is saying that this law is still work under progress, another statement is structural change. Government has made more than 1,000 amendments in law, rules, notifications, circulars, and in software. The traders are not allowed to make single change in whatever mistakes they have committed. How this is possible? We have to understand that. We have to understand, you say that we want to make simple or adoption of digital technology. You go on changing your system. Even during pandemic, you continued in last year, in 2020, in August, you changed, you brought something new. But by the time traders could understand what has been brought, again you bring something new. What are you doing? Why don't you have some system that we will make change only once in a month? Then you announce changes, but your system takes time to make change. How we are going to go ahead? You say one nation, one tax. Now, advanced ruling authority on advanced ruling. Each state is having their own authority. One state interprets a particular thing in a one way. Another state interprets same thing in another way. Now what to do? Whom to accept? Is it one law, one nation? We have to understand. 4 years have gone. No, there is no tribunal. That means you don't want to make provision for justice. How can you run a law without providing proper justice? Then there is clear division between CGST officers and SG officers. Their way of approach is different. Then what did government say? They said that everything will be digital. There will be no officer and human contact. Now, in pandemic, they are sending us notice. They are visiting our office, and then they are pressurizing for details. This detail, that detail. And the state administration department have put lockdown. We cannot work in our office. Our staff is not working. Who is listening us? Let us know. Let us have some ear where we can raise our voice. It is not, you see, we have to understand there was central excise and there was state tax laws. So the state tax laws was easily approachable. Now you have brought in central excise rules, service tax rules, and made them applicable to common citizens. And then for you, it is work under progress. And for dealers, they have to comply. They have to understand. They are not digital. How this can go ahead? What is GST Council meeting? At what intervals? And what decisions they are taking? Is there any authority who is listening to whatever issues are being raised? We have to understand that. The economic slowdown is because of GST or some other reason.
Fair enough.
Let us understand that also. You see, we are totally.
Yes, Mr. Bhatia, fair enough. Point taken. And I will go to to Dr. Samir to get a response on many of the on-ground realities that you're talking about. But before that, let me go across to Mr. Sarvanan as well. Mr. Sarvanan, your own view. I know one of the main issues here is with respect to the state's compensation and the fact that many states are unhappy with the way things are going on that front. There is also the issue of extending that now for more than 5 years. What's your perspective?
GST was mooted, though it was taking away the finances from the states. We, the DMK as a party, has always batted for more federal powers, more powers to the state. We agreed to this GST. We supported this GST because we thought that the central government will be fair. They will be able to give us what they promised, but it did not happen. Our finance minister, Mr. PTR Tyagarajan, has very, very succinctly put it. What this government has done, how it is taking away the taxes from the common man, from the states. See, the cesses from 2014 has increased almost up to 21%. So the divisible that is allocated to the states, the things which will be included in the GST is taken out of GST, the purview of the GST by way of cesses. This cesses is an affront, he says. Quote Mr. PTR Tyagarajan, he says it is an affront to fiscal federalism and an assault on cooperative federalism. The Prime Minister waxes eloquence about cooperative federalism, but when it comes to GST and the tax matters, there is no cooperative federalism. And he has also raised, the party is also raising yet another important issue about this GST Council, how this one vote, one state on the GST Council is very unfair. The recently concluded GST Council, most of the states, that is the states which contribute almost around 70% to the GST, they wanted to do away with GST on the COVID-related drugs, COVID-related products and everything, so that it will be available at a lesser cost. But the states which are contributing 30%, that is around 17 states, stalled it. 19 states stalled it. So it could not be taken up. So this is very, very unfair to the states. And he has proposed that there should be, at least now, immediately, how the oath should be based on the Rajya Sabha membership. That is one of his recommendations, which is also touted by our party. And apart from that, there are various other issues in the GST, though it has came up with much fanfare. They are saying that, of course, it has reduced the lot of complications, but has it been able to deliver what it promised? Or the panelists pointed out how there were all different tax rates. I think that is the biggest undoing of this GST regime. When we are talking about a unified command, there should be a unified tax. Of course, we expect that in a country as complex, as plural as India, we cannot have a single tax for all the products. That will be very elitist. But at least there is no rationale. It is decided by the GSTN, but there is no rationale. What the central government wants, it happens. Yet another issue that is being pointed out is that the de facto entities on the GST are having more powers than the GST Council. So that is one thing which has been flagged by the finance minister from the state of Tamil Nadu. So these are the most important issues, and the revenues which the states are getting, the biggest contributors are getting less tax in return. I think this is a problem which has to be sorted out so that the states which are all contributing more will be able to develop and will contribute to nation building.
Yeah, all right. Tamal, I want to come to you here before, talking more about the ground realities, because this is the issue of what the GST Council is supposed to be, what it does, is been something that a lot of people have been talking about, but and it has become a big bone of contention in terms of what the council has become today. It's become a political battleground of sorts instead of people actually coming together and trying to decide the best way forward.
Exactly. I'm not privy. I'm not privy to any classified information. What we hear is this: it is not cooperative federalism. What we are seeing now. But at the same time, let's not equate GST with demonetization. Demonetization was a completely different thing. That was not reform, and let's not discuss the less said the better about demonetization. But GST was indeed something, and it's have been in the works for long. It's not. Yes, the credit goes to this government for speedy implementation, but while it pushed ahead of this, but that necessary infrastructure was not in place. Now, just to a few clarification, the states, the center has the access to cess and special surcharge, which is always advantage vis-a-vis states, and which is why this 14% guaranteed revenue growth was been committed, just simply because there is no level playing field between state and center when it comes to revenue. And states do not have this access to cess and special surcharge, which is why this 14% thing happened. But there is a problem because it has not been, we have not been able to, to generate as much taxes, even though finance minister had said that the number of taxpayers have gone up, and we have been for last 18 months, 1 trillion plus we have been generating through GST, but still it is 1% of GDP as a tax. Our revenue has come down, and from every budget estimate, I'm just repeating, it's come down. It is there, and it is less than what we had expected. So that's the root of the problem. That's the root of the problem. And yes, indeed, it's this automated, indirect tax regime, the new ecosystem has been globally appreciated. But what is happening, the tech glitches, etc., the seamless flow of input credit, what we had anticipated, and that ease of complications, etc., it's not happening. That's the another issue, which is why we will find that the GST appellate tribunal, there are I don't know the number of disputes you need to you won't be able to count them, the number of disputes, and that clearly shows that what are the issues. But the relevant point is this: as we approach 5 years, so 5th year is a milestone year. A lot of things would change in the 5th year. Now, would we go ahead with the changes, or would we stick to the same kind of as I said, the commitment what is made? So these are the fundamental issues we need to change. I think there is I don't think it's more than the debate. Is actually going back to the drawing board, and let's get into not in the politics of it. It is indeed a welcome measure for the nation, but even now, after 4 years, and 4 years is not a very short time, we have not been able to, you look at you spoke about again and again MSME and the ground realities, where that input credit is not coming on time, for multiple reasons. So there are issues which need to be, apart from the larger issue of the cooperative federalism is a threat. Centers and the states don't see eye to eye. There's a animosity, if I may say so, when it comes to the tax share. In fact, today Reuters, there's a report saying that government, quoting a government official, there will be some GST bond because of the shortfall the government would, which till now it has been taken care of by the government borrowing, and the center passes on to the state. But apparently, quoting a finance minister official, the Reuters report says that there would be GST bond, and it says the announcement could come as early as today. This afternoon, I saw the report. So that's the scenario. I think the root of the problem is we are not generating enough tax revenue as we had anticipated.
Yes, absolutely. That is, of course, the revenues are nowhere close to what was anticipated. Dr. Samir, you wanted to come in. Please go ahead. And my point to you, before I come to you, is the fact that, yes, we do know this was a needed reform. It had to be done. There's no question. There are positives. But let's not forget to look at the fact that what the issues are. And the question now has to be, how do you get past those? Because obviously, the intent of everybody is to make sure that this turns out to be a structure that simplifies things and that makes it easier in terms of the entire taxation structure. So let's look at it from that point of view.
Sure, undoubtedly, yes. If you were to ask me as to what would be one key issue that the GST Council and the leadership, both state and the center, would want to take as a lesson from the last 4 years, one key thing is, given our own experiences between my fellow panelists from my neighboring state, Tamil Nadu, myself from Karnataka, we have always had good happy days when there was a days of surplus, and the point that we had to sort of learn over a period of time was the pain sharing. We knew how to share the surplus, but we never knew how to share the pain. That's always a challenge, right? When I'm talking the Kaveri thing, that's a larger lesson. The expectation, anticipation was that there's going to be a good amount of revenue generation, surplus, and whatever shortfall what the states would face, the center more than compensated with that 14% defraying, so that you're able to sort of at one level bring about the equitable and justifiable sharing of revenues in the new change scenario. That was number one. Number two, the point that he made, probably I would want to sort of correct him, is the shortfall of revenue devolution of revenue to the state has got nothing to do with the GST, but that's got to do with the Finance Commission. So that's a completely different thing altogether. And that being, let me finish. So that being a different thing altogether, whether you're getting lesser than what you were getting earlier in terms of percentage is a Finance Commission matter. That said, completely noted that there's been a shortfall in revenue. The government stays committed to defraying whatever the shortfall the states have faced in terms of probably extending even the cess to make sure that the states don't go empty-handed with respect to the GST implementation process.
Yeah, can I just come in?
Okay, all right. Professor Aman Agarwal. Yes, Mr. Saran, I'll come to you in a minute. Professor Agarwal also wanted to come in. Please go ahead.
Yes, you see, these are teething troubles which any system when introduced brings in. And despite the earlier tax framework which we had, it had to be tweeted almost every year for something or the other. So even despite it's being in place for decades, there was requirements of tweeting it and restructuring and redoing the system. Now, you see, as I said, the GST has come in and, people still have this framework that India was not ready. If you ask a mother, is she ready to be going to be a mother, getting a child? I think a girl would never be able to say that I'm ready for it till the child comes in and it's in your arms, and then you have to bear it and take it forward. And this is where we are seeing these teething troubles. Fortunately, despite the fact that there have been falls as against projections, we have still been able to stabilize and increase the reach of GST. And please not forget to understand that we have a parallel economy historically for almost about 70 years, which has been as strong as a normal economy. We did have the Jan Dhan framework, the demonetization and other things which were made to attempt to reduce that framework, but to a great extent, it was not still feasible. We have the cash outlay almost to the four times the tune which we had when we had demonetization currently existing in the economy. So that is not the thing which came in, but certainly to change this attitude which got developed over a span of about 65 years, 70 years, over a night is not possible. And this is where some of the points which you also mentioned, when you go and want to buy things, you still see those frameworks where people are ready to offer you things off and on the platter with GST and without GST. Now, this is something which most governments are challenged and perplexed with, but I think with the way things are smoothening up, the way people are seeing benefits coming in, and despite, as I said, lockdowns and pandemics, if we are able to have an average revenue growth of GST of around 1 lakh crore, which is being projected, I think it's a great achievement for the government. Certainly there are downfalls, and that's why they're not able to provide to states. And even if they have to raise the bond in the interim period, it is not a problem. The government is in the framework of raising bonds because the rates are fairly low. So even if they raise a bond, it will not be at a very high rate, and that will give them a leeway in due course to take care of the fact how to go about mobilizing more funds. And as I said before, if we are able to introduce, and which the government must do within the next year or so, is to introduce alcohol, fuel and other items, some of the critical items like alcohol and fuel in the GST framework, given the fact that large number of states in the country are having the BJP dominance, they can certainly do it at least in their own states. If the other states will like to follow in due course, I think that will give them a GST bumper roar with the fact that it will keep on inflation, which RBI and the markets are actually troubled with as of today.
Right. Right. Professor Agarwal, I agree with some of the points you've made, but one difference of opinion, I don't know how much we can keep calling this teething issues, because at the end of the day, we are 4 years into this new tax regime and there are some serious issues on ground, not just teething issues, not little technical glitches here and there. There are serious on-ground issues and realities that are being overlooked at this point in time. But Mr. Saravanan, yes, please go ahead. You wanted to make a point on the state's issue with respect to the compensation.
Yes. See, it's not about sharing the pain. We are always willing to share the pain. But the central government, ever since the BJP has come to power since 2014, it has not allowed. It is trying to take away whatever powers are left with the state government. It is arrogating all the powers to itself. That is the problem. You leave us. You leave the powers to the state governments. We'll be able to share the pain of everybody. And what are you doing? 18%. That's what. See, of course, the divisible pool is with the Finance Commission. But what this government has done is it has increased the cesses so that the common man is paying a higher tax to the government, the indirect tax to the government. But in return, all those taxes in forms of cess is going to the union government. It is not divisible to the central government. It is not within the cess is especially levied to all those taxes which is outside the ambit of GST. That is the point. That is the issue we are raising. That is why we are saying we need reforms. We need our voices to be heard out in the GST Council. And now they have this GOMs, where especially the big states, where the BJP is not ruling, all those states are left out. All the minor states, which will say yes to the BJP, and BJP ruled states have been included in the GOMs. So what meaningful contribution can a state which is making so much of contribution to GST can give? That is the issue. That is the point we are trying to make here. We are saying it is unfair. You are saying it is not politics. It is politics. The BJP government is playing politics with everything. That is the problem.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Anshul, you also had a point to make. Please go ahead.
No, what I was saying was that you cannot divorce the birthing problems of the GST from the outcomes that we're facing right now. It is an absolute disaster when it happened. You know, the economy had been contracting for a couple of years since before that. The manufacturing base had actually shrunk by then. When you introduced and when the results came out of the first year of GST, we had lost in the manufacturing workforce had actually declined from 51 million workers to 27 million workers by then, according to CMIE data. You know, the government actually never focused on the real economy, which is jobs and output. Labor-intensive units were never focused on. That is why, you know, the Make in India program of the Prime Minister that was tom-tom so loudly immediately flopped, because it just focused on some kind of nativism, a kind of a scheme. It never focused on labor-intensive manufacturing units. I mean, that's the base of your GST, right? How are you going to get at those taxes? Let's get down to where these goods and services come from. So you have to have a healthy economy for actually to have good revenue collections. You know, the budget estimates, and the problem is that the budget estimates and your revenue collection, there's a gap between that. And that's a substantial gap. And that's what all our eminent panelists are talking about. You know, that ranges from about 75% to, I think, 90%. It keeps changing year on year. Last year was a particularly bad year in that kind of estimated revenue collections. So until the government improves the state of the economy, it takes a number of other measures which are related to the pandemic that takes the economy out of distress. You have, I'm not digressing, but if you have, demand side economic stimulus, you have a proper fiscal stimulus, not the supply side, RBI tinkering with the interest rates here and there. If you have proper economic policy, if the government understands macroeconomics well, it should do that, and automatically your GST, things will improve. Now, the other contention is, of course, the deeper contention is this huge stress deficit between the center and the state. That is a larger political question. That will take a long time to develop because the center has to show its integrity and commitment for having a proper cooperative federal structure. The Prime Minister may talk about it all the time, but actually the actions of the central government are actually quite the reverse on everything you see. That's why I'm bringing politics into it. Politics must be brought into it because it's actually the legislature that passed this law in the midnight of some day somewhere 4 years back. So it is politics. It is the legislature. There are lawmakers. We have to bring politics into it, and we have to build trust in order to have proper structural reforms in the GST and also a healthy economy.
Fair enough. Dr. Anshul, fair enough. But the matter of fact that it has been in the making for 17 years before it was implemented, so it wasn't sort of done overnight at the drop of a hat. But let me, in fact, just take a couple of points to Dr. Sameer here. Dr. Sameer, the fact is, one point which Dr. Anshul has raised is that there is this trust deficit between the centre and states. Whether it's warranted, unwarranted, called for or not is not the point right now. But there is this trust deficit. And when it comes to this kind of a tax structure, this kind of a reform that we are trying to ensure gets better, that fixing that trust deficit is something that's extremely important. So what is your response on that? And the second question I have for you is with respect to bringing fuel under GST, because we just heard many of the panelists say that it needs to be done. Why is that taking so much time? The Finance Minister today, in fact, said that there's no issue why this fuel should not be brought under GST. So what are the hurdles?
I'll take your second question first. The FM herself has repeatedly reassured that she is completely open and committed to the fact that the fuel can be brought into the GST Council, can be discussed and implemented. So very, very open, clear-cut statement from the Finance Minister, no less. Coming to the first question, the so-called trust deficit, it's at the end of the day, if you look at from 2014 onward, the day Narendra Modi took over as the Prime Minister, it's been a rapid mudslinging repeatedly, time and again against anything and everything that is being done, right? I mean, I want to sort of quote a Sanskrit verse here. Tatra divana kartavyam dosha drishti param manaha dosho yavidyamanopi tatparanam pradrsyate. Which just means that if you want to find a fault when there none exists, then you only find fault, nothing else. Look, at the end of the day, the country, the Prime Minister and the party has been abundantly clear that we are going to work in a federal structure, work with all the states, be it a natural catastrophe in Kerala in terms of cyclones or in Orissa or in Bengal. The response has been the same by the Prime Minister. Make sure that immediate relief is granted, irrespective of whether it's your state or not. On the contrary, if I may want to sort of put this out in the open, the state of Karnataka, which was then ruled by the BJP, probably had a bit of disillusionment that Kerala was given a better treatment than even Karnataka. So the point I'm trying to make is, let us not unnecessarily, repeatedly bring in politics in everything and anything that we come across, just because it's been passed by a legislature, right? That said, there are issues. The first thing is no one is brushing it under the carpet. If there are issues, the FM has rightly pointed out, each and every issue is being considered, will be considered. The very fact that you had so many amendments, so many revisions in the GST Council speaks to the fact that the Council is open to getting feedback from all across the country. How will you get it all across the country? It could be a small state, it could be a big state, and the traders there, the people there, the businessmen go to the respective state leaders and put across their viewpoint, which in turn gets reflected and amplified in the GST Council. So the point is clear. Yes, there is a bit of a trust deficit. It is why it's a tough situation going under the pandemic. There is a situation wherein it was a completely unexpected hit taken 2 years back to back. That said, nowhere has the central government has made a statement saying that it will run away from its responsibility in terms of paying what the states deserve and are its due. So much so that we had one of the panelists make a statement that probably it can go out of the way, get the GST bonds in place and pay them. It is duty bound and it shall honor its commitment. That's simple as that. No two words about it. Now, if you want to bring in politics, everything, and try to run this 14 to 19 and 19 to 24, you're more than welcome. It's a free country. Please go ahead.
Okay, all right. Professor Aman Agarwal, we are coming to the end of the show, but I very quickly want to ask you, the road ahead, because obviously now what is important is to ensure that things move and this entire structure gets better and, workable for people who are still finding it difficult, because my issue is not with respect to the big companies and the big organizations who are already digitized and have no problem, but it is the small, the carpenter, the plumber, the other small contractors who are finding it so difficult to adhere to this entire system. Obviously, those realities have to be fixed, and the fact is the revenues have to also go up. So what are the solutions, that can be looked at?
Yes, I think you raise a very critical and important point here. The first thing is the issue which is raised about is the tax trust deficit which is there. I think the government needs to come out and give the fair dues of every state to the best possible levels, even if they have to bring out a bond to raise those funds to give it away to the states. They must do that in time so that there is more confidence amongst the states which gets risen when it comes to trust deficit. Secondly, the industry raised the gentleman from the industry raised a very critical point, is the complexity which is being raised because of the changes which are being made very frequently. First of all, most traders or small businessmen, except for micro businessmen, most other small, medium-sized businessmen do all their tax framework and other works through chartered accountants. I think they are a very large community which is servicing this country very fairly well. For decades now. And I think we don't want to take their jobs from their hands. I think they're doing it beautifully. And it is not that I, as an individual running a small business, would actually go about doing those filing myself. It is the chartered accountants who do it for even small businesses. I've been meeting large number of them. They're doing it for them at fairly reasonable prices. Now, given that, I think that it is not a question which is creating a problem. It is a question of establishing. I think I did see some screens where you said you need to stabilize. You cannot actually go into a stability format or go into a very marginalized format as we are actually reforming, trying to understand and see which product remains in which slab and which one goes off. Like during the pandemic also, the things which are required to the healthcare, specifically the vaccine and others, the GST had to be reduced. So those kind of momentary decisions need to be taken now and then. And I think the GST Council is doing a proactive role. It is just a question of reducing this trust deficit and trying to introduce these key components like oil and alcohol into the system, which will actually benefit the country and the GST collections, and including the states in the long run. It will not a short-term measure, but in the long run, it will certainly benefit. And we have already seen the benefit from the global markets coming to India.
Fair enough, Professor Agarwal. Fair enough. My apologies for cutting you off, but I want to very quickly go back to BC Bhartiya. BC Bhartiya, very quick, reaction from you on what is the one thing at the moment you would like to see immediately change, very quickly.
You see, my submission is that instead of defending the GST law, it would be better if we highlight technical glitches and fault in design of law. That would be better. If there is teething problem for administration, same is with traders. So then why are you not passing ITC seamlessly? Why are you levying penalty? Why are you levying late fee charges? Why e-way bills are blocked? Why registration is cancelled? Why officers are sending us notice? We have to understand. You see, we were the persons who busted crackers from 30th June 2017. And now we are the persons who are shouting against the law. So we have to understand what are the issues. You see, the best law is that law which do not pinch the society. GST is pinching common man. And if it is pinching common man, then it is responsibility of the government to see what are the areas for which common man is suffering. And they should be proactive and try to resolve that instead of doing whatever has been said, politics and this and that. We are not concerned. But we are definitely concerned. Seamless ITC should be there. Business should not be put to loss. So no blocking of e-way bill, no cancellation of registration. You see the statement full of negativity. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. You cannot.
Fair enough.
You be positive.
Fair enough,
yes,
Mr. Bhatia. Completely take your point there. Some very relevant points that you've raised with regard to the ground reality and which really need to be looked at. I'd like to thank all my panelists for joining us on this edition of the Urban Debate. Extremely important discussion here with respect to the GST. The fact is, it has been 4 years. Yes, there was a slowdown. Yes, there is a pandemic. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know what the final repercussions will be once it's all over. But at the same time, this is an important reform. This is something that has to be pushed forward, has to be improved manifold at this point in time. How long can we keep calling it teething issues? How long can we keep calling these issues small technical glitches? Because it is much bigger than that. There are issues, there are people who are doing anything and everything that they can to evade the GST simply because it's too difficult for them. That is one of the biggest problems today, and that is something that needs to be addressed as early as possible for this to actually become one nation, one tax. And of course, the rationalization of taxes is something that needs to be done because we still have multiple structures, we still have multiple taxes. So all of that is something that needs to be done for it to actually become a good and simple tax, which I'm afraid it is not right now. Thanks for watching.